Okay. So and Prapan, apologies, but I've not made this a scientific talk, but on purpose a more personal talk. And you'll see lots of photographs in the talk, which I hope you might recognize. Some of them are my own, from the many times that we've met through the years. And this is the title, which all of you can read. And I thought of what's going to be my title, and I thought, how do I characterize you? And this is what, I mean, there are more characteristics that I couldn't name, but I picked physician, scientist, visionary leader, and activist. And as you've seen from the video, other people agree with that. So I've also, kindly supplied by Dr. Nitaya, stolen some of your slides from the Ngali Man lecture that you gave 4 years ago at CROI, which was a brilliant lecture. And in the lecture, in one of your slides, you mentioned the magic ingredients for a successful HIV response, and I've woven my talk around that. So one was updated knowledge, open-mindedness, and commitment combined with a sense of urgency. So the HIV epidemic in Thailand started, of course, in the mid-80s, and you were the first person, you were in the forefront. Even in those early days, you were already meeting movie stars, as you can see on the right, Liz Taylor, 1985. I think many of us only achieved this decades later, but you already had someone like Liz Taylor there in 1985, who of course was at the basis of the American Federation for AIDS Research later. Then in 1992, you co-founded the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center in Bangkok, which has really become a leading research and treatment center for HIV/AIDS in Asia. And under your leadership, the center has conducted groundbreaking research on HIV/AIDS, including in the later years, vaccine development, shifting to HIV prevention when prevention options became available, and also treatment. And my talk, because I know most about that, will be focused on the treatment part. Again, this is one of the slides that you showed in your Ngali Man lecture. And just for those of you in the audience who weren't there, just looking at the number of items on the slide, you can imagine the contributions that Prapan has made. And I have encircled in red the treatment part, because that's what HIVNet was established for, which stands for HIV, Netherlands, Australia, Thailand collaboration, research collaboration. So in the mid-1990s, by way of HIVNet, Prapan led efforts to introduce antiretroviral therapy to Thailand. And at that time, the way to make treatment accessible was actually by conducting clinical trials and participating in randomized clinical trials, which was really the basis for HIVNet to be established. It was done with our unfortunately late colleagues, Joep Lange, who was a close friend and colleague of mine in Amsterdam, and David Cooper from Sydney. And this is a lovely picture from the early days after HIVNet, a few years after HIVNet had been established. These pictures, these photographs, I actually made Eugene Krohn, Eugene Krohn was a physician working with Joep and myself in Amsterdam in those days. And Joep basically said to Eugene, you go to Bangkok and help Professor Prapan establish this trial center. So sure enough, that's what Eugene did, and he went. And I asked Eugene, who currently lives in Thailand, to see if he would have old pictures, old photographs from those very early days of HIVNet. And here you see Professor Prapan. You see, I don't know if I have a pointer, actually, but let's see, here. But I can't. Eugene Krohn is actually this guy over here. So young trial physicians at the time. This was on the steps at the entrance of HIVNet. And on the top right photograph, you see them meeting for lunch. And on the bottom right, you see the room in the center where the medication, the trial medication, was being prepared. So about 7 years after HIVNet came into being, Prapan and Joep and David and other colleagues published this paper in AIDS to write about the lessons learned from having established HIVNet. And one of the lessons, and I highlighted it on the number 8 in yellow, is to perform studies that are of interest not only to internationally, but also to local constituencies. And as an example of that, the very first HivNat-001 trial was a randomized double-blind trial of half dose versus standard dose of zidovudine plus zalcitabine, so AZT plus DDC, in Thai patients. And as you can see from the curve, half dose, this is looking at viral load and the percentage achieving less than 400 copies per mil. The half dose did not perform as well. The whole idea behind, as far as I remember, behind the trial was that if half dose would be sufficient, obviously more patients could benefit and could be treated, because in the background of Prapan's mind and the others' minds was access to treatment and providing access to treatment. Oh, this maybe, I don't know if I can go back. Yeah, this is not a nice picture. I don't know if you recognize this photograph on the right, Prapan, but it is, apparently it's you and Eugene having lunch or dinner at his house in Bangkok in those years. And I go back again, the other picture is actually when the results of the 001 trial were first presented at a conference here in the region. So this whole concept about being able to use lower doses of drugs stayed around, and a lot of pharmacology research was conducted in HivNat in the context of HivNat. And through preparatory research, it was actually discovered that the protease inhibitor atazanavir, the drug exposure in Thai people was higher than in people from Western parts of the world, and therefore, again, the same concept was tried, but in this case with triple therapy, to use a lower dose of atazanavir in virologically suppressed patients who switched their regimens. And in this case, compared to controls, indeed, the regular dose of atazanavir and the lower dose of atazanavir performed equally well. And if I remember correctly, the atazanavir was actually atazanavir which was produced locally in Thailand. So going back to that paper in AIDS, another aspect learned was to promote clinical and laboratory practices that meet international research standards. Well, without exaggeration, I can certainly state that HivNat has accomplished doing that very, very well. And just as an example of these are actually slides taken from our last scientific advisory board meeting for HivNat. It shows the AIDS Clinical Trials Group International Science Office team. And as you can see, many people who started their careers in HivNat are now part in leadership positions of the ACTG network, including, for instance, Philip Chen. That's the person over, oops, go back. Philip Chen here. Philip actually was received he's a neurologist from Hong Kong who did most of his PhD work in HIV neurology in the context of HivNat and the SEARCH study with Professor Serena Spudic, and he obtained his PhD from the University of Amsterdam a couple of years ago. So it's really wonderful to see, as was mentioned also by Nitya, that young researchers are growing into leadership positions. And much of that was nurtured by being able to work at HivNat. So one of the examples of a ACTG trial that actually recently, not formally yet, but in a press release, released its results is the RETRIEVE trial, which is a randomized placebo-controlled trial in people with HIV on suppressive ART to see whether the statin, pitavastatin, can reduce hard cardiovascular disease outcomes. And this trial, HivNat was actually recognized for being the top recruiter as a single site to this trial, which I think speaks to the quality of the research and the ability of HivNat to do clinical trials. This is the press release I just mentioned from the NIH that pitavastatin was able to had a 35% reduction in hard cardiovascular outcomes compared to placebo, and we're looking forward, of course, to seeing the final results when the data are clean being presented at a future, probably near future conference, hopefully. I took out this slide, which is not strictly speaking HivNet, but it's the search study, but it's all, I mean, basically all comes from the mind of Dr. Prapan. So to me, it's all together. Cure, HIV cure studies. I mean, one of the things very important things in the early days that Professor Prapan established was a so-called anonymous clinic on the premises of HivNet, where people could be tested anonymously. And the anonymous clinic grew into a platform which could lead to conducting very sophisticated research studies, including HIV cure studies, because people with primary HIV infection could be identified very, very quickly and then enrolled into clinical trials. And one of these trials is depicted on this slide, where the hope was that if people would be treated with ART with acute infection in FIBIC stage 1, that maybe they would remain suppressed after ART was removed. Unfortunately, as you can see from the graph on the right, this was not the case, although there were individuals where viral rebound was delayed. But I'm showing the slide not so much because of the trial, but because of the fact that sophisticated trials, which demand enormous effort, sample collection, tissue collection, etc., can actually be conducted very successfully in this setting. And that's something I can tell you from my own experience, we are not able to conduct it as efficiently and successfully in Amsterdam. Another example, and don't worry about the details, is this trial which is about SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, which was developed in the context of HivNet and Chulalongkorn University by Professor Kiat and his team, and published in a high-impact journal showing that this newly developed, locally developed vaccine was in fact safe and immunogenic. And again, and that I've taken that from your Ngali Man slide, commitment combined with a sense of urgency. Obviously, in the context of the COVID pandemic, certainly urgent and interesting to see that a lot of people, I only realized that when I looked at the slide again, a lot of people mentioned on the slide have a background in HIV research, were not necessarily working on COVID in their research, in fact they weren't, but switched very quickly to being available to conduct COVID research. But of course you can only conduct the research if you have a setting where this is possible. So HivNet has contributed many, many things, and one of the things I want to touch on is regional training. And that has been very important through the annual Bangkok Symposia, where I had the pleasure to speak for many, many times, and which has increasingly has brought people from the whole Southeast Asia region together to really exchange the latest in HIV research. And one thing to mention, again, Professor Prapan, but also Dr. Nitaya have managed in, I don't know how you do it, but you hear something new, Sharon mentioned innovation, and then you turn it into practice the next week in the context of Bangkok. So I'd like to hear the secret at some point, but it shows the enormous drive. So I showed you HivNet 01 study. In the meantime, the portfolio of trials is mind-boggling. It's no longer just HIV, it's also HIV and hepatitis co-infection, it's HIV and TB, it's TB on its own, it's vaccine research, it's STI research, it's PrEP, it's both locally conducted trials, trials conducted in international setting, etc., etc. Dr. Anshali, who has recently taken over the leadership of HivNet, does an amazing job at coordinating this trial portfolio. I used to be, together with you, head of a clinical trial research center in the Netherlands. We never had a portfolio as big as this. So, congratulations. Publications, increasing publications, just 51 in 2022. Many in higher and higher impact journals. So it really, and really in across the board, from translational research to clinical research to more epidemiology-oriented research, etc. So has this contributed? I think, I mean, you can never point the finger, but in my mind, certainly this effort at HivNet and in Bangkok, which has spread out over the region, has contributed to the achievement in the testing and treatment cascade. And you can see that Thailand performs better than the region as a whole. And obviously, as undoubtedly Professor Prampan will argue in his own talk, there is still need for improvement and things need to be done. But nevertheless, it's an amazing achievement. An advocate. I have met very few people in my professional career who are as much an advocate and a very vocal advocate in every setting imaginable as Professor Prampan. And whenever Professor Prampan speaks, everybody pays attention and listens. Maybe not always as fast as you would like, but ultimately they pay attention. So you've been very much an advocate, and also an advocate, and that will be addressed in the next talk, for vulnerable people living with or at risk of HIV. So teaching, education. So Rina, forgive me putting you on the spot, but I couldn't help it, because I mean, one of the things, this is an email I received in 2018, late 2018, from Professor Prampan, that Nitaya and I are thinking of proposing Rima, whom I think you know her to be a PhD student at the University of Amsterdam, and you can read the rest of the email. Well, I had indeed met Rina, I think probably early that year at one of the Bangkok symposia, where she gave a talk, and I was completely blown away. I remember I went to, after the talk, I went to meet, because I just simply wanted to meet you. And then later in the year, I got this email, so obviously I said yes. And we're hoping that it will be, I mean, Rina has in the meantime enrolled in the PhD program in Amsterdam, and we're going to keep at it until Rina gets her PhD. So thank you, Prampan, for doing that. And it's really mentoring the next generations, which is a quality that you've had throughout the years, and it goes for myself as well. You've mentored me as well. So it's an incredible achievement, and that way you have touched many, many people's lives. So in conclusion, I think I can say that Prampan's contributions to HIV/AIDS research and treatment have had a profound impact on the field and the lives of people living with HIV/AIDS in Thailand and beyond. Your leadership, expertise, and advocacy have helped us to advance our understanding of the disease, and very importantly, improve outcomes for patients. And as we continue the fight against HIV/AIDS, I think we can look at you as an example and a model of excellence and dedication to the cause. So I'd like to end on a personal note, because as far as I remember, this is the first time we met. It's 1999, so it's 25 years next year, and I have been invited to give a talk. I have no clue what the talk was on, but it was in Chiang Rai. It was the first time I traveled to Thailand in November, and it was the time of the Loi Krathong, I hope I pronounce it well, the Floating Lamp Festival, and I don't have a picture of that, but I very vividly remember how you showed me how to put the lamp on the river and make it flow. So that's in my mind. And on the right is a picture I took on one of the HIVNet retreats, where you can see Joep and David. I think the occasion, because I also have a short video, this was where you had a slight, I wouldn't say conflict, but the opinions were clearly not aligned. So there was a discussion going on between the three of you. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, because I think those discussions undoubtedly over the years have been very helpful in progressing the cause. So I'd like to end here and by thanking you for your hospitality, always, your friendship, your insights, and all your accomplishments for the region. So congratulations again, and thank you.